The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 14. Sunday Sermons and Sunshine. In all parishes, ministers gathered in the square every Sunday at noon, taking to their soapboxes so that ascending souls could hear their testimonies. Each minister had an individual take on ways to effectively master life in the physical. Lucia seldom missed a Sunday sermon, and those delivering the sermons never missed her. The borders flanking the winding paths leading to the square were never without the most extravagant blooms, and Lucia picked a hibiscus flower and stuck it in her hair, continuing her journey in the warm sunshine. Another bloom immediately replaced it. Every oncoming soul noticed Lucia as she neared, all parted so she need not alter course by an inch. Some glanced as she passed, others stared because they had not yet managed to remain circumspect. Lucia focused her attention on a large group of souls to her right, many of whom would soon be in their antechamber. They were sitting under the canopy of an ancient sequoia and looking up at a minister who was pacing comfortably to and fro, adding the final touches to a sermon on an aspect of consciousness that troubled most at some point during their journey. The minister's voice was temperate but commanding. For the mentally lazy, legions of wandering thoughts will upload into the thinking mind, and until your attention is taken back to the immediacy of soul awareness, you will experience the restrictions of this type of gross thinking. Until you reattune your awareness, the anti-force will reign and unconscious manifestation will be the result. This is the reason planet Earth is such an intense training ground. The crowd nodded in understanding, many looking up at planet Earth, orbiting some 40,000 miles away. The minister continued. During his final incarnation as Jesus, the Godson's mission was to bring to the awareness of the receptive their origin and their destiny. From the banks of Galilee and from the synagogues of Capernaum, he preached to many of you gathered here today. The message is the same as it was in the beginning. Through harnessing thought form energy, it is possible to graduate from the early evolutionary cycles destined to stimulate your receptiveness to and mastery over the creative power within. Only then can man come to know who he is and what he is destined to become. Identification with soul awareness is where your power lies, allowing you the ability to consciously call forth the unseen. Conscious creation is the premise of your existence, and forever shall be. The minister smiled and bowed his head, and another soul, identical in appearance, took his place next to his twin. Most of you already know what I'm about to tell you, but for your own sakes know it again. And for those of you new to the game of life, know that what I'm about to tell you could possibly be the most important thing you will ever hear. A bold claim, thought Melchizedek. Disguised as a woman in possession of a much lower vibration, the Godson was standing at the back of the crowd. Melchizedek had spent many lifetimes preaching, and now he loved to watch. When Lucia sensed the Godson's proximity and using direct thought transference, she could not resist teasing him. You just can't help it, can you? It's in your blood. Lucia was the only one to sense Melchizedek's presence, but after letting him know she knew exactly where he was, she blanked him out in order to listen to the sermon. "Watch out for the tree," was the last thing she heard the Godson say. The minister was in full swing now. In your darkest hours, remember to have faith that the creator of the universe has big plans for you, as well as the rest of the human race, much bigger than your thinking mind could ever possibly conceive. To perceive life from a foundation of enhanced faith is to create your experiences from beyond the range of everyday sense perception. Faith is an entirely different and superior operating system belonging to the sixth sense. The sixth sense is latent in everyone who has not yet expanded their consciousness by encompassing broader ideas of spirit, but faith is poised to govern the perceptions of all who have. The crowd remained silent and attentive. Have faith in ideas of spirit that empower. Take the law of affinity, for example, for to have knowledge of it will be a real advantage to those serious about graduating. Belief attracts. Belief is creative. Belief is the foundation of manifest reality. The law of affinity means that like attracts like. If the collective energy of the anti-force mind is strong enough, and the consensus is that man is on a collision course with doom and gloom will get created. This has happened many times throughout history. No big deal. Life continues, and here you are today on the verge of going physical once more. Your assignment is to challenge the anti-force of your thinking mind by consciously overriding it with higher thoughts, or the simplicity of good old-fashioned presence. My brother and I are very old, and we have both experienced a sleeping world where the anti-force reigns supreme, and a conscious world where light does. The crowd mumbled to each other, many of whom too had witnessed the anti-force manifest to varying and often startling degrees. Both ministers now spoke in perfect unison, twin souls acting as one. A soul develops in a judgment-free reality, whether he has created light or dark. By overriding the anti-force, you will be able to consciously create thought, word, and deed, perhaps only lasting briefly at first. When you are conscious, you will be acting like the light. Acting like the light means your journey through the physical will be speedier and more peaceful, your experience is less dull, and because you are able to control yourself rather than react to the impulses of your lower nature, opportunities to shine your light will enter your life from all around. Melchizedek likes to have lots of little apprentices roaming the earth. The crowd laughed, and so did Melchizedek. To conclude their sermon, the ministers said, "Those of you who cause dark by unconsciously allowing the anti-force expression must know that a stagnant life experience, laden with mental chaos and negative karma, will be the effect. And when you return Starside, you will be very disappointed in your performance. For many, this goes on lifetime after lifetime, but essentially, it's all just a matter of choice. By choosing to upgrade your beliefs about the nature of reality, its structure, purpose, and orientation, you will come to know that you are in control of the anti-force constantly present in your thinking. Remember, the Godson designed the anti-force to compel you to remain awake. You can be machines if you like, operating automatically, or you can program yourself and truly live. Conscious programming gives you power. One day, like Melchizedek, you too will be powerful. Identify with who you are and not what the anti-force tells you you are." Both ministers clasped their hands in front of their hearts and bowed their heads as they waited for another minister, Ezekiel, to take his place before the crowd. Melchizedek could tell today's sermons were making an impression, impressions that would remain in the subconscious for future recollection, to aid the possibility of enlightenment being realized in human form. Melchizedek smiled the smile of the well-pleased, and then, breaching protocol by using speed of intention travel, saw to it that no one noticed his sudden disappearance except Lucia, who knew that the Godson was back in his observatory. Ezekiel waited for the crowd to refocus their attention before beginning his sermon. "For those of you entering the physical with life plans to teach, allow me to reiterate what I hope will not take you too long to call forth from your subconscious mind when there. Moment by moment, you must rise above your lower nature, thereby suspending the influence of the anti-force. You must do this as a continuous daily waking practice, and there is no room for slacking. Only then, as one awakened, can you experience freedom. Only then can those in bondage needing an example of what it means to be free actually learn something from you." "And you were one of the best teachers Earth has ever seen," thought Lucia as she sent out a wave of loving energy to one of her favourite ministers. Ezekiel nodded a thank you, and Lucia mouthed, "You're welcome," as she entered the vicinity of a very old minister named Enoch. Enoch's voice was deep and strident as he spoke to his audience about the pitfalls of succumbing to thinking mind dominance. The Babel problem, ladies and gentlemen, is the regrettable hazard of allowing unnecessary combinations of data to enter into and then dominate one's awareness. Some of the data might be factually accurate, even essential for planning and problem solving, but the rest is just useless speculation woven through assumption and conjecture. All negative mental chatter the thinking mind imposes upon the awareness is not only exhausting, but if sustained, it is creative, translating into the manifestation of difficult life experiences. Thought is the divine energy that causes manifestation, and Earth is the perfect place to learn how to manage it. You only have to look at the history of mankind to know that many poor souls have had a very difficult time doing so, and if you are not conscious, you will join their ranks. Alusha laughed as she passed a visiting dignitary sitting on a bench enjoying the sunshine and the revitalizing energy emanating from the fountain. He was being shown Starside by a young escort whose role was to flaunt the majesty of a place that had long since been known as heaven. Alusha sighed. Most returning souls were upset to learn that heaven was just a place of transit, not retirement. But as Cain had often pointed out, life was so tough for so many, who wouldn't want to embrace a delusion that appeared to be the only symbol of hope left? As Alusha passed by, her voice was warm and gravelly. "Hello, my friend, and welcome to Starside. Would you tell Emissary Balaam that I said hi? My name is Alusha. He'll know who I am. We go back a long way." The dignitary did his best to remain composed, but his jaw dropped ever so slightly as a pleasant chill ran through him. Unable to take his eyes off Alusha, he muttered to his escort, "Who is that?" Anticipating the question because most asked it, the escort said, "That is elusive Alusha. She is that who cannot be known, being too subtle and unusual for an extraterrestrial intelligence like yours to even begin to comprehend." With a toss of the head, the dignitary gasped. "Comprehend? Are you joking? I am a repository of the reports of the premier minds of my race. My function is to assimilate and store higher knowledge. I have no difficulty comprehending that which lower intellects assume to be incomprehensible." The escort laughed and spent the rest of the afternoon happily recounting the stories and the legends surrounding Alusha's existence. The tales of long ago when Alusha first joined the hierarchy especially tickled the escort's fancy. It was on a nighttime sojourn that Alusha had imbued the atmosphere of the lower stratums of the caves with a vapour of dimethyltryptamine, hoping that by catapulting the cave dwellers into other realms of existence, they might be exposed to some of God's many mansions. Her intention had been to inspire them to rejoin the Ascension program so they might dispense with the lifeless existence they had saddled themselves with and eventually get to partake in a more exhilarating future. The result was mixed. A few came to the surface and made their way to the Department of Energy Realignment, humbled but inspired by their experience. Others fled deeper into the caves because the trip had been too much to bear. Interfering Starside with the natural flow of a soul's evolution was strictly prohibited, and Alusha knew this but acted anyway. This was unprecedented behaviour. Melchizedek had no choice but to banish Alusha to the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. The wilderness, located on a sparsely inhabited planet on the other side of Pluto, and populated by deviant lower life forms, was a barren place where souls were tempted and tested to ensure levels of purity necessary to operate in the angelic realms. Melchizedek sent in a retriever to bring Alusha back on day 2. "Welcome back," was all he said upon her return. Alusha quickly promised never to interfere in such an experimental way again, assuring Melchizedek that she now solemnly understood the whole affair had been an example of what not to do. For weeks afterwards, Melchizedek had made many trips to the caves for the laying on of hands. The cave dweller's consciousness had to be returned to its exact condition prior to what had come to be known as Alusha's great intervention. Making a left turn and circumventing the fountain, Alusha continued on, bringing her attention back to the rose beds flanking her path. The scent was divine. A minister was entertaining a smaller crowd of fervent souls ahead. She was dressed as though on a movie set. She wore a fringed tunic made of 2 rectangular pieces of flax seamed along the top of the arms, with a hole cut out for the head and on the sides for the arms. The tunic was belted at the waist by a colourful cord, and her feet were bare. That the righteousness of the law be fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit. Miriam was using terms consistent with the sacred teachings of early Christianity. The thinking mind is the flesh, crucify it. The Spirit is the still small voice within, identify with it. The sermon was short and sweet, and the message was simple. Pay attention to the 2 sources of thought origination. Light and dark exist as opportunities for expression. Choose in order to become conscious in order to graduate. Miriam sensed Alusha's presence, and without looking in her direction waited for her to get closer. Then, in honour of the beautiful Dreamtime consort, she stopped her sermon mid-flow and began to sing a song, a tribute to the Galilean lifetime they had spent together. Both women, mother and aunt, had indulged the little Nazarene against the wishes of their men. I danced in the morning when the world was begun. I danced on the moon and the stars and the sun. I came down from heaven and I danced on earth. At Bethlehem I had my birth. To Alusha and Miriam's surprise, and the surprise of everyone in the square that day, Melchizedek's voice, as in the Norse tales of Thor, drowned out the voices of everyone else, and he continued singing where Miriam had ended. Dance then wherever you may be, for I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. Booming and melodious, Melchizedek's voice appeared to be coming from the bowels of the universe, up to the heights and into the reaches, coming out of the flowers and out of the clouds and out of the sun, a stunning acoustical performance that shook everyone to the core. I danced on the Friday when the sky turned black. It's hard to dance with the devil on your back. They buried my body and they thought I'd gone, but I am the dance and I still go on. Alusha looked at Miriam, who had not been expecting this unprecedented first. She was wide-eyed and thrilled that Melchizedek had joined in her song. Alusha anticipated what would happen next. Every soul in the square stopped what they were doing and began singing the final verse with their creator. The thunderous rapture of combined song was heard all over Starside, and by a few souls near to ascending on earth, none of whom could identify the holy chorus going on somewhere deep in the stratosphere. They cut me down, but I leapt up high, for I am the life that will never ever die. I live in you and you live in me, for I am the Lord of the dance, said he. For added effect, and just for a split second, Melchizedek plunged Starside into darkness and reduced the temperature by 50 degrees. Gasps and childish shrieks of delight completed the exchange, and Miriam made the sign of the cross over and over again. With a smile on her face, Alusha shook her head ruefully and continued walking while everyone else in the square recovered from the impromptu happening. And now, with the business and bustle thinning out, Alusha was able to quicken her pace. The smell of hyacinths was intoxicating, and as she breathed in the scent, she could see her grand and private residence looming ahead on the top floor of the Dreamtime building. As she made her way towards it, she brought into her mind's eye an image of her beloved dog. His name was Heap. Heap's favourite pastime was barking from the roof terrace of her penthouse at the people in the square below. Because his vocal cords were extraordinarily large, his bark had been very disruptive. Alusha laughed to herself as she took her thoughts back to a distant time, a time when her first attempt at creating sentient life had not gone as planned. After obtaining permission from the higher order of intelligences, Alusha and several other members of her ascension level visited a planet named Meepo in a neighbouring star system. The melting pot planet is still home to many thousands of life forms called into being by those students attempting to enlarge their creational range, but often with unexpected results. The Tech, situated in the grounds of an enormous residential campus, is where students receive instruction, where they are monitored and offered feedback. The rest of the small planet is home to the created, with an ecosystem equivalent to Earth's, but with mostly shady grassland and temperate freshwater terrain. Long ago, Alusha had arrived at the Tech filled with excitement and dogged by nerves as she set about the creation of a puppy in the presence of 2 supervisors. The supervisors were there to offer support but not to assist. Both had advised Alusha to begin with something simple, but she felt quite capable and was rather more ambitious than her fellow students, who all started with molluscs and small invertebrates. After maintaining her meditation with unbroken focus, Alusha invited an intricate, all-encompassing image of a smooth-coated, amber-eyed Labrador with silky cream fur and velvety ears into her mind's eye. She was uncertain at what point her vision had become corrupt, but what came into being was a dark brown, curly-haired puppy with 2 heads, mismatching eyes, a 5-foot-long tail attached to a body that was proportionally absurd. The supervisors remained indifferent to Alusha's gasps. They'd seen it all before. Unlike non-sentient life, it is not possible to simply remove one's attention from a sentient life form in order to get rid of it, and if it's no longer wanted. Alusha had created life, and that life would live eternally with the option of ascension, which most undertook, whether on Earth or within the constraints of another suitable training ground. In fact, Alusha herself had been brought into existence on Meepo as a monkey cross and not a single-cell amoeba. The one advantage to being created under such experimental circumstances is that the natives of Meepo are not required to traipse through the lower forms of sentient life and so skip the early evolutionary stages entirely. So, what might have been labelled a stigma was actually universally regarded as a plus. Alusha had been immediately possessive of her strange new puppy and decided to take it back Starside to raise it. Cain and Melchizedek were the first to visit Heap, both expecting to see a Labrador, not a 2-headed something with a 5-foot-long tail and freaky-looking eyes. It was one of the few times that Cain was unable to contain himself. A budding hysteria had gathered momentum that day until both Cain and Melchizedek were rocking back and forth in Alusha's living room like delinquent schoolboys. Barely able to breathe, Cain said, "You might want to stick to plankton for a while." Melchizedek had to leave and decided afterwards to steer clear of Alusha for 3 days. Heap had started out as a normal-sized puppy, and Alusha hand-fed each of his hungry mouths with creamy bottled milk. She spent hours lying on her bed with her creation nestled into her neck, using both hands to stroke both sets of ears. Sometimes she would put him in a carrier and take him to work with her, but Heap's unprecedented growth rate soon put a stop to that. To help curtail his seemingly boundless energy, Alusha started taking Heap for long walks deep into the country, a leash around both his necks, but this didn't last long either. After a while it was easier to saddle him up and ride him, or sit on his back while he swam in the Jordan. During the months that followed, it became apparent that Heap would soon be too big to fit through the widest of doors or squeeze into elevators, and although it pained her, Alusha knew he would be better off on Meepo, a sanctuary for other misfits his size. Upon arrival, Alusha spent over an hour hugging her creation, nestling her head into his necks, not yet ready to do what she came to. Eventually she regained her poise and prepared to cut the proverbial cord. As Alusha removed the leash, she remembered the words uttered by an old friend who had loved all animals as much as she. "You were born free and have the right to live free." Melchizedek remained by Alusha's side holding a box of tissues. Other students looked on from a respectful distance. Within a few minutes of adjusting to his new surroundings, Heap bounded up to a gangly horse-like creature named Hetty as she drank water from the lake. Hetty had one head but no eyes, a stumpy tail and extraordinarily long legs. Heap sniffed Hetty all over while she stood motionless. Then it was her turn. After a lengthy period of circling each other and acquainting their noses with every orifice, they never again separated. Heap was Hetty's eyes, and she the love of his life. The supervisors on Meepo were delighted with their new acquisition and told Alusha that she was welcome to visit whenever she wanted, which she did every day for several weeks, and then to this day monthly. On her trips to Meepo, Alusha refrained from wearing any makeup due to the voracious licks from both mouths of her beloved creation. Heap eventually grew to be twice the size of a Clydesdale horse and had a vast predator-free continent on which to roam and graze, but he always stayed close to Hetty, who preferred to remain by the lake. The recall of past times quickly faded, and just in the nick of time, Alusha had wandered from the pathway, and the bough of a willow tree was only inches above her head. She ducked and laughed. She could hear Melchizedek laugh in unison with her from his observatory. Alusha quickly refocused her attention. It was time to go over her upcoming schedule. Tonight she had several ports of call, one of which would require persistence because the dreamer's mind was especially hyperactive. If time permitted afterwards, a table would be waiting at Salvatore's.